net.
Of course.
But when you think about the things that we're talking about, being an informed citizen, thinking critically, having scientific literacy so you can be part of moving this planet forward and solving very real problems such as climate change that right now aren't being adequately addressed. Understanding how to shift the political system in this country to a place of again, compromise, progress, understanding how our government works. You know, those are things that kids are going to learn in science and social studies. And one of my biggest...
Because Venezuela, I lived in Caracas, in el barrio Petare. If anybody listening, if you Google Petare, el barrio Huaycaipuro, if you speak Spanish, for the last decade, it has been on the top 10 most dangerous barrios, neighborhoods on planet Earth. Like every night, literally, I'm not joking, every night it sounds like it's fireworks, and it's just people shooting each other or just shooting to the sky or celebrating a birthday and just shooting. The culture of bullets, the culture of shooting. And there are dozens of thousands of murders every year in Venezuela. So much that there is not enough forensic doctors that can identify the bodies on time before they rot. Just for you to have an idea. Among many others, it's an infestation of corruption and radical political ideology and so on and so on. But there has never been one school shooting.
Yeah,
ever.
Or a shooting in a supermarket where you're shooting random. I'm coming up on 2 decades working for DPS, almost splitting that between being a teacher and being a school leader.
And now you are 3 months into the collaborative director role,
correct,
which might give you a really good opportunity to calibrate a little bit of what you knew best practices were when you were a principal, and now see some of those best practices in other schools and also learn from them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a two-way street. Obviously, my first and foremost goal is to be of service and support to the leaders that I'm working with, but then also learning from them, seeing what's working in their schools, seeing what I can, where I can connect certain leaders, borrow from certain places, identify trends with respect to what's going well, what are commonalities with things that, you know, all buildings are working on or struggling with, so I can identify opportunities for professional development or learning. You know, still wrapping my head around it, but that's exactly the spirit that I hope to continue to take to the position.
I'm very curious to hear from you, now that you have this opportunity to oversee other schools, what trends are you noticing across all the schools with regards to needs and also with regards to strength?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start with the strengths. You know, I see lots of strengths and commonalities with the work that schools are doing to do the mindset work with teachers, to really create classroom conditions that are honoring kids, engaging students, and then diving into the offstage work that fuels that, you know, around the planning and professional development. I guess what I'm saying is, when you look at the schools that I support and their strategic plans, and you talk to their leaders and you see what they're getting after, it's inspiring to me, because it's all the right work around mindset, around just the, you know, the heart and soul and the spirit that we want to approach kids with, and trying to create conditions for teachers to show up in the right way and do what is very challenging work. So I've been impressed and very grateful for the opportunity to kind of have a window into all these schools and see how these leaders are leading. You know, I just want to make sure that I'm very clear in acknowledging that, because again, I know how hard it is, and I know that when you're engaging in the systems work and trying to put all the right things in place, but then also trying to move the staff forward with the right, you know, mental framework and approach, you know, that's complicated work, and I see everybody just diving headfirst into that. One thing I would give DPS credit for is recruiting and hopefully retaining, and I'll be part of that, just a really high caliber of people that they choose to be leaders in schools. Been incredibly impressed with people that I've met all along my journey, but now in my new role, getting a window, you know, going and sitting down in these folks in their office with them, chewing on their strategic plans, doing the walkthroughs, talking about the work, just a deep appreciation and gratitude for everyone involved. And we've got some really incredible people leading in our schools, yourself included. So that gives me a lot of hope, and I want to do right by them in my new position. But I'm impressed, and that energizes me in my new position. I think to answer the second part of your question, the common struggles, you probably wouldn't be surprised with what they are. They're reflected in our district priorities. I mean, when you go into classrooms, you still, in every school, regardless of demographic, regardless of all of those things, you see missed opportunities to have kids chewing on things in more meaningful ways. You see over scaffolding. You see, the need to better support teachers in planning for engaging, relevant experiences through the eyes of their students. And then I think you see a lot of opportunity to do a better job of weaving in social emotional supports throughout the day, if you want to call it TCL skills, whatever. Doing a more intentional job of not leaving that conversation compartmentalized into a morning meeting or whatever. Mm-hmm. You see some teachers doing incredibly well, but I think as a district and as leaders, we need to do a better job of teeing teachers up for success. For what does that look like throughout the day? That's always been a big thing for me, so I was glad to see that. I don't know if you've seen where we're going next year with our district priorities, but we're going to hopefully better support teachers in making those connections throughout the day to just, pull more out of kids throughout the day, but in their minds have them understand how to do that, but also how it benefits them for those life skills as well.
And that's one of the things that I celebrate the most about DPS, around the focus on seeing the kid, seeing the child, their social, emotional wellness and development, and making sure that schools are a safe and welcoming space. Yep. It has been said and repeated so often and with such a strength and clear message that it is definitely a must and a look for in every rubric you have when you talk about schools, but also as a leader and as a teacher, when you're developing lessons, you're always thinking of how can I make sure that every kid is seen, that every kid is being served. And those challenges that you mentioned are also a challenge and a common trend here in my own school as well. And I think those are the things that we're trying to crack the code. Yeah. We're trying to see, okay, we know this is where we need to go. What would it take? Yep. So that constant grappling on that specific problem. I think the more focused we stay on it, the faster we'll find it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. But it's a long and complex journey, and I think, when I think back to my time as a school leader, and then, even considering in my new role how I support others in doing it, it can be very hard to distill some of those things. Sometimes mm-hmm. you go into a teacher's room and, sorry to get kind of hokey on you, but you just feel the vibe, you feel the energy, you feel the spirit, and the kids feel it too. And there's just that, everyone's kind of leaning into mm-hmm. it, and it feels exciting, and then the teacher's pulling so much out of those kids because of that, and they have that, and some of that is unique to who they are as a person and their character and whatnot, but also there are things that we can do to kind of distill that and support other teachers in creating those environments. And that's something that I've always sometimes had success with, but sometimes struggled with in terms of leading for a school-wide atmosphere such as that. But something that I think is really important. When I think back to my time as a teacher, I think there were times where I had success with that, and I've struggled even in my own self-reflection to say, okay, why was that? How was I able to create those motivational, engaging classroom environments when I didn't have the benefit of, I'm going way back. There was no LEAP, there was no a lot of the, professional development we have, the equity experience, so many different things. None of that existed yet, and so we're just kind of figuring a lot of it out on our own and had some success, made some mistakes, but I always tried to approach my classroom culture and my classroom environment just with an infusion of I guess now we would use the term those TCL skills, and weave in that narrative throughout the year. Be very opportunistic every chance you get of like we're hitting this, we're reinforcing this. This is what we're all about. This is who we are. This is what we do. Just kind of that, almost like that athletic coach piece. And then I'm going to ask a lot of you, but I'm going to support the hell out of you.
Yes.
And we might all collapse on the floor at the end of the day, but that's how we're going to do it.
Yes.
And then, you try and apply that to a school leadership perspective and do the same thing with your staff. I'm especially in turnaround, like the list of things we have to do is so incredibly high. Let's acknowledge that. Let's be real about it, and let's not BS. We have to ask an incredible amount of ourselves, but I'm gonna support the hell out of you. Do whatever humanly possible to make it happen. And I think if you couple that with bringing the right people in the building, you can create that energy and create that momentum.
Absolutely. You're just making me think of equity, but I wanted to also give you the opportunity to educate me a little bit about what is your understanding of equity. And now that you have the opportunity to have been a teacher, a school leader, and now starting your collaborative director journey, observing other schools, how have your understanding of equity evolved over time, and where do you stand with that definition now?
Sure. For me, it's that spirit and that mindset that I was talking to a little bit of, how are we going to push ourselves to always be extra mindful of who our students are when they're walking in the door, what is their experience, look at things through the lens of their eyes, their family's eyes, and then think very deeply about what they need to be successful and how we're going to figure out how to make it happen. And I think just on a very basic level, that's how I try and operate when I'm pushing, for equity. And that can be looking at a system, and evaluating the system for, equitable experiences and outcomes, or just, how we're talking as a team about how we're going to support a particular child or family. And that's when you get into the common understanding of, it's creating the conditions for a student to be themselves and get what they need in response to them being themselves so they can succeed. But really, it's that spirit that you're approaching the work with, and that push that ultimately gets down to the student level. And we have mechanisms in place in most of our schools with respect to, internalization processes where we're trying to plan through the lens of students, or we're talking about creating classroom culture and the conditions and morning meetings and whatnot. Again, to allow students to feel comfortable to be themselves and partner with us and building that understanding so we can give them the supports to move them forward. MTSS, you can keep going on and on. But again, I always try to take that mentality to that work, especially in supporting teachers to just keep pushing to get to a deeper level of understanding.
I love how as you talk about equity, not only you get excited, but also you put this huge emphasis on seeing kids as human beings and bringing that spirit. In a way, you talk about equity as if the academic piece was the next step after having the basic conditions for kids to thrive.
Yeah. Well, I think it is in my mind, and that's always been how I've approached being a teacher or a leader is, I think the culture and the conditions create the foundation for everything else. And of course, I realize that we're in the business of education, of academics, of instruction, but we have to approach it through that mentality for ultimately for it to feel right for our kids and for them to connect with them and move forward.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. I see it every time. Kids don't learn from people they don't like.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yep.
And when kids are able to see themselves and to find their identities and feel encouraged and loved in an environment where they by default are believed in, they thrive. I see it happen over and over.
Yeah.
One thing I know about you is that you're a dad as well.
Yep.
You have two?
I have 3 kids. I actually have 2 stepkids in their 20s, but I became their stepdad when they were 3 and 5.
Wow. Okay.
And now they're 23 and 25. And then the original plan for my wife and I was to have a child between us pretty quickly after we got together, but it took us 10 years. Which is life, So then all of a sudden we had our older kids in their teens, and we're very blessed to welcome our daughter this is kind of personal, but it's my story. We had a rough go of having a child, including, a couple miscarriages, and then we gave ourselves a date where we were going to stop trying and just be at peace and say, okay, it's not meant to be. We have 2 beautiful kids already. We're done. And my daughter, we had a date on the calendar of game over, and then my daughter was probably conceived a couple days before that. So, wow. So we call her the buzzer beater if you're a basketball fan, because she came in at the last minute, and it was a huge blessing. So I also, in addition to 2 adult children, have a 3rd grader.
You have a 3rd grader?
Yeah.
What school is she?
She's at Southmore.
Southmore, okay.
Yep. Which, funny enough, is one of my schools.
Ha.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yep. So I'll share another story, and hopefully my daughter won't watch this or see it for years. She'll be frustrated. But during my first visit to Southmore as a collaborative director, I walk into the office, and guess who was in the office having a restorative conversation?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. So, I had to, it was a little embarrassing, but it's life, and my daughter's beautiful and wonderful in many ways, but, she's got some work to do like all of us, and she was in there, and we laughed it off with the principal. She didn't, but the rest of us did.
I'm asking those questions because not only I want you to share some of your story, but also I'm a father as well. Here at my school, I have both of my boys here at my school, 2nd grade and 1st grade.
All right.
And when I think of love, and when I think of dignity, and when I think of opportunity, and all the definitions that I have about equity, and even the way I face my job, the way I treat everyone, I cannot help but to think of my role as a father and how it shapes my identity, not only as a man, but also as a father, as somebody who provides and serves and takes care and loves. And it shapes 100% of how I approach life and every day.
Absolutely.
And I just wanted to ask you as well, how is fatherhood influencing the way that you see the world and the way that you tackle every day?
Sure. Well, I think, like you just named, you wanna have that mentality, knowing that you are in service of the families who are at your school, and they are entrusting you with the most precious thing in their entire lives and worlds. And so you put on your father hat, your parent hat, and think about, okay, what's the experience going to be? You want, if your kids were to go somewhere else, you want to hand them over. You want them to be loved. You want them to have dignity. You want there to be high expectations for them, all of those things. And so that's that feeling that you feel for your own children that you have to apply. I know that there are educators working in our schools who don't have kids, and I still think that they have the ability to do just that. But as a father, just that gut feeling, that love and care and concern. Love takes many forms, and it also takes the form of concern and worry about just the things that you hold most dear. Are they going to be okay? And so I think for those of us who can take that feeling and transfer it professionally to the to meet the responsibilities that we have to create the environment that you're talking about at this school for others to feel confident, sending their kids into, is almost just at a basic fundamental level of how we should approach things.
Yeah. We are recording, by the way, this episode, I think 3 weeks after we had this unfortunate event at East High School, and there was a shooting over there. And to me, it moved me deeply, precisely because of those elements that we've been discussing up until this point. Not only am I a father here at this school, but I was a Lincoln High School teacher 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And many of my students at Lincoln now are parents here at my school. And I have teachers at my school who were my students. My assistant principal was my student.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. I mean, before we move on, that's such a cool thing for you to be part of.
It is beautiful. And to me, the idea of fatherhood, the idea of being a parent, the idea of being a member of a community and seeing these kids grow, they were my kids, and 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. Now they are close to 30, bringing their kindergarten child here, and I see this generation happening before my eyes, and my call to protect, to serve, to look after them. And when I see tragedies like that happen, I don't know. I don't know how I could cope or handle any of those things happening in my school, and I don't know how you could as well. And I just wanted to bring that to the conversation because you being a father and a leader in a district where these things are very likely to happen again, and seeing how vulnerable we are as a community and systemically and structurally and physically and culturally, it makes me wonder what your thoughts were when that happened, and if you have any ideas of how can we maybe mitigate or contribute to making this a safer place.
Yeah, that's probably going to be the toughest question of the day. My initial thoughts were, I don't know, if I were to answer honestly, some of it was numbness, because I also, I was a student in DPS a long time ago. I went to school during the busing era, so I went to school all over the city in different schools, and I went to schools that were really impacted by gang and gun violence. And so it's just been something that I haven't personally been impacted by too much, although in my middle school, we did not go outside for all of 7th and 8th grade because of violence in the neighborhood. This was Cole Middle School, but it was back in the 80s when the neighborhood that Cole is in was very different, before the city was gentrifying and changing. So again, I don't want to come across like I or my family have experienced the tragedy that many and far too many families have experienced, but I have now for almost the entirety of my life been in a school system or just been in a place where it's repeatedly happening. And I went to school with classmates who were shot and some killed in high school, all the way to getting into education and just continuing to hear about it, and if not hearing about it in Denver, reading about it somewhere else. And so there's an exhaustion and a numbness there that I struggle with. There's of course an anger and disgust, and I struggle to make sense of to what degree these are things that schools have the ability to do something about. I think that there will be changes coming from this. You will probably see a shift in some of the policies, and we will likely see an increase in security in our schools. And I would answer honestly when I would say I understand the reasons why SROs were problematic in the past, and they certainly need to be better trained, but better equipped, educated, all of those things made to feel like they're part of the school community, better ingratiated into the staff. There's so much we could do better to avoid some of the past problems we've had with the school to prison pipeline and set these officers up for success. I believe for them and police in general, we need to train and support them better, but then ask much more of them in terms of how they show up, because they serve a very critical function in society, but there have been massive problems. That being said, safety is more important than anything. And so I believe that they should have a presence in school, because the work we need to do as a society, we're far from doing, and in the meantime, we need to keep our children safe. And so while it's not ideal, we need safety, we need protection. And so that's sad. In an ideal world, maybe not, but we're far from that. And then you start to get out of what I think lies in a school-related conversation, and it's just the sickness in our society, the obsession with guns. There's two big buckets there. I think that there's the individual obsession with guns that leads to all these horrific school shootings, and that's mental health, and that's just some serious disconnect in our society that leads individuals to some really scary places. And then there's the gang activity lack of opportunity, et cetera, that also is connected to guns and to violence. And I think that those are two different things that society needs to continue to work on. I wish I had a more eloquent or better answer for you, but like so many other people, I'm just heartbroken, overwhelmed, numb, and I feel like we're really far away from being able to do anything that's going to address the root cause or the where this is really coming from, which is heartbreaking. So then because of that, we need to do whatever we can to just keep our schools safe. It's really, really sad. Really, really sad.
I agree 100%. I do. And I think going back to your starting point in the answer to this question, by the way, I agree, man. Who can have a eloquent or sensible answer to a problem that is so complex?
Yeah.
So complex.
Yeah.
But I think the approach you're giving it to, first thinking of SROs, school resource officers, being a presence in the buildings as people or institutions that can be integrated with the other overarching elements of what makes a school work, giving SROs the training and the opportunity to become an element of a community, just like the nurse, like the teacher,
Correct.
like the school principal, like the custodian.
Yep.
We all are agents that show up to this building to make sure that our kids are fed, educated, loved, protected, and we all are on the same page. And I think just to that specific point, obviously the history of the U.S. that I am still learning, I know there is a lot of trauma and a lot of things to heal in that regard, but that is precisely why they should be in those places, so we can face the trauma and heal it by continuously exposing ourselves to new opportunities that help us redefine and rewire our brains and our emotions to that specific issue.
Yep.
At least, just like you said, at least while we find other ways to keep us safe. But this is, to me, this is an emergency. And what worries me and scares me and disappoints me is that little by little we come more number and number and number, and then the issues continue to happen. And I am Venezuelan. I'm from South America. I have seen many people get killed, and I have seen many people shot and dead, and many things that I wish I could not remember. When you get to that point, you start becoming just grateful that it didn't happen to you, and you start forgetting about the collective, and you start just focusing on your own safety, and that's a trauma response. And in this super unsafe environment, I am just grateful that nothing happened to me, and you just learn to live with that incredible amount of violence around you.
Yeah, I mean, that's unacceptable, but I'm scared that's where we're going. If you read the news just this week, there was I just read yesterday there was a shooting in Texas because a cheerleader tried to get in the wrong car, and the occupant in the car first reaction was to shoot. There was a woman who turned into a driveway in upstate New York, wrong turn, and the landowner just came out and shot her. And then there was the teenager in Kansas City who knocked on the wrong door to pick up his siblings. They think that was probably racially motivated. But again, the homeowner's first inclination is to shoot. And so if it's the fear piece you're speaking to. We become numb, but then everyone gets so fearful, and then they're arming themselves up, and then there's just more guns, and everyone's on edge, and people don't have connection, and they don't trust each other. And it's a scary place to think about where this could lead. And I think a lot of it is I don't know, the interesting thing about this country, and I think it's good and bad, is we have this tradition of being individualistic, and you can do it and pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and whatever you can, you're on your own, and that's the mentality. I know when I was 18, I was a young man. The message from my mom was, okay, it's time to go. Well, you're going to join the military, go to school, but you got to go. And there's this spirit in this country of, you got to figure it out on your own. And the reason I bring that up is I think that it's created this notion in society where we're almost too individualistic, and you send this message, especially to young people, that They have to do all these things. They have to, overcome all their challenges. That they shouldn't reach out for help, and you get some folks into some very isolated, scary spaces, and then they go down these dark paths. And when you combine that with this culture of guns, where there's just guns everywhere, and you can buy guns whenever you want, and gun shows and gun shops and just this glorification of guns, those are two scary things coming together that lead to just a lot of mass shootings. And so, again, I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's something that's very concerning and scary, and I don't know why it seems to be, not to discount the violence in other countries such as Venezuela, but there's different root causes. The root cause here is very strange.
Yeah.
Very, very strange. And there's something unique to this country that's causing people to just turn to gun violence in a very unusually and scarily quick manner.
Yeah. I wanted to address that point because Venezuela, I lived in Caracas in el barrio Petare. If anybody listening, if you Google Petare, el barrio Huaycaipuro, if you speak Spanish, for the last decade, it has been on the top 10 most dangerous barrios, neighborhoods on planet Earth. Like every night, literally, I'm not joking, every night it sounds like it's fireworks. And it's just people shooting each other or just shooting to the sky or celebrating a birthday and just shooting. The culture of bullets, the culture of shooting. And there are dozens of thousands of murders every year in Venezuela. So much that there is not enough forensic doctors that can identify the bodies on time before they rot.
My God. Just
for you to have an idea. Among many others, it's an infestation of corruption and radical political ideology and so on and so on. But there has never been one school shooting.
Yeah,
ever.
Or a shooting in a supermarket where you're shooting random people.
Never once. Maybe there has. I don't know. I've been out of Venezuela for
not to. Maybe if there's been one here, we have one almost feels like monthly.
That is the major cause of teenage death. Yeah. So I wanted to address that because beyond access to guns, which itself is an issue that I definitely want to talk, especially with somebody who maybe can prepare for a conversation like that. I think you and I are just we're so passionate about this. Yeah. But if anybody could listen to this and gather some data and come and maybe present something to us so we can engage on a further conversation about this. But the mental health, gosh. Yeah. And just to address the point where the individualistic culture where you have to figure things out on your own, perhaps that's the message that you receive. And then you're a 12, 13-year-old boy or girl, and you're so isolated from the world, and you're encountering so many issues in your head and in your mind, the lack of affection, the lack of belonging, the lack of all those things piled up to the point where it makes sense for you to look for a gun and unload it on children. Yeah. That is way beyond a gun. That is like your soul, your heart, like your mental health is so rot, so destroyed that you are so bitter and resentful about the world that you find that as an option. And I made that comparison with my country, my home country in Venezuela, because the crime and the corruption, all those things lead to gun violence. But it's a gun violence that, in a way, is a result of a system that has deprived people from other kind of opportunities. Here in the U.S., I just see middle school, elementary, 4th, 5th grade, middle school, high school kids in a path of just tragedy, like disenfranchised from the world. And it is so sad to see, but also how frustrating it is to also kind of suspect that the schools are expected to solve all those issues when we don't have the capacity.
Yeah, I agree. I certainly think we have to do everything we can with respect to supporting our students and with their mental health and social emotional well-being. But I agree. It's it's beyond what schools can do alone. And if schools are expected to be the Band-Aid on this gaping wound that society has, that is this, I don't know what to call it other than a sickness right now, that's tragic. Just because, like you said, schools are not going to be able to fully do that. Try as much as they might. There's just some larger factors at play. I do think that it would be nice if we could see increased resources given to schools to allow them to take their best shot at it. I mean, in my dream world, every school would have a mental health team that's twice the size as what it probably is now.
At least, man.
The ability to do some really meaningful and differentiated work supporting students with social emotional needs. So there's opportunity there, but it comes down to people and money. It also comes down to a lack of acknowledgement, I think, from politicians, society, whoever you want to say, on the work that schools really have to and realistically engage in to meet students' social emotional need. It's very complex, and there are schools where the need can be elevated because of different socioeconomic reasons, and those are schools that are doing incredible work and overcoming incredible challenge. But again, in a perfect world, I would love for schools to have incredibly robust social emotional support, so it's not always on the back of the classroom teacher to do all this stuff. I mean, I know I said that culture and social emotional work is the foundation, and it is, but I also want to acknowledge that that's a heck of a lot of work for teachers if you have a large, diverse class, diversity meaning diverse social emotional need, to work with all those kids and bring them, into the fold and create the conditions for them to then go on and learn the academics. And so teachers are doing incredible things, but they need a heck of a lot of support there. I was lucky, at Valverde, we were turnaround, so initially we were getting a lot of money, and I spent a lot of that money on a mental health team that was twice the size of what it should have been on paper. You have your school budget and what your requirements are. We were doubling that and working very hard to create a comprehensive system where we were very intentional with the tier 1 supports we were giving everyone, but then absolutely leaning into that tier 2, tier 3 space, to get to know kids, to get to know their families, and to see what we could do to try and help them out. That's a lot. It's a heck of a lot, and that's where the resources conversation comes into play.
It is. And if we're able to measure mental health development with the same accuracy that we see academic development, and we had benchmark and assessments for the development of mental health, we will realize that we will need as many teachers, as many social workers as we have teachers.
Yeah.
And we just let the mental health just naturally and progressively develop with any sorts of measurements.
Yep.
And those kiddos that are the silent ones, the ones that don't cause trouble, we just let them go.
Yeah.
Because they're not
showing us in our face that they have needs. And then, especially if we have limited resources, our resources are going to the kids who are showing us because they're eloping or whatever, that there's an intense need there, and we need to meet that need. But to connect back to our previous conversation, the kids who are internalizing or kind of silent, especially when you get into middle school and high school, those are the kids I worry about. Are they getting their needs met, or are they just flying under the radar and increasingly feeling very isolated?
100%. And that's the call to looking at policy and looking at how we are allocating resources and how we're defining equity for our school and our classrooms. Because obviously, when a kid is very verbal or physical in the way they show their needs and they're flipping tables or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we definitely allocate resources for them. But I think it's profoundly unequitable to not pay attention to everybody else, or to, at the expense of the other 20 quiet kids, we are going to add another student who obviously needs something more than 30 minutes of extended time in a classroom. So looking at equity from flipping the coin and looking at those quiet kiddos, I feel terrible when I think of them and when I think of equity that way, because there are kids who spend 2-3 years with me, and because they always go on their radar, I don't remember their names.
Sure.
Or I don't take the time to learn their names. And I say I don't take the time because I want to take responsibility for it. But the conditions, the happenings of the day-to-day schools typically go towards the emergency, towards the things that you got to mitigate immediately. And that's one of the critical things about equity. And yeah, man, the conversation around mental health is, to me, is, if I were to rank the challenges with gun violence and mass murders in the American society. By the way, it only happens in the United States, the way it is happening. It doesn't happen in Canada or in Afghanistan.
Sure.
Not even in Ukraine or in Venezuela. The way that people just arm themselves with bullets and guns and go to an open space or to a classroom and shoot
and
people,
kill innocent
it
people.
only happens in the U.S.
Yep.
And I want people to be aware of that, because it is a local problem, and it is the product of the way that we're raising our kids and the way we're interacting with each other as a society.
Yeah, I agree.
When you go to get a driver's license, if you don't pass the eye exam, you don't get a license. And one of the reasons is because with your car, you could go and crash and hurt somebody else. I think you should be able to buy as many guns as you want, as long as you pass every 6 months or every year or every time you renew your guns license, you pass a mental health check.
Yeah,
and you got to be checked fully on. By the way, full disclosure, I have many friends who have guns, and I shoot guns too. And I've been in shooting range, and I find it entertaining to see how you can manipulate guns and how many guns exist and blah, blah, blah. It's a whole world, and I can see how people can be obsessed with it. But I also need to let everybody know that you got to be responsible. If you're going to go to a shooting range and you have the suspicion that out of that 100 people, there is one that might be a little bit mentally ill, you're not going to go there. Mm-hmm. Or if you're going to go there, you're going to be on the lookout. So, yeah, I just building the balance between, this is a mental health issue that is local to the way that the U.S. culture exists, and also the love for guns has to be calibrated with a very clear check on who is having access to those things.
And I think I think another huge problem is also political, because we've reached a point in this country, and you even now are seeing it creep into education, which is heartbreaking when you talk about just some of the issues that came up in the pandemic around banning books and all this stuff. But my point with guns is, we're in a political space where compromise is no longer an option. And that's a very scary thing. I mean, this country was founded on compromise. Yes. And I know this country was very imperfect when it was founded and continues to be imperfect. Yes. But ideally, we want to be progressing towards a better place. But, when the Constitution was created, the people in the room, they were giving things up. And they were making deals, and they were compromising. And now we don't do that anymore in our Congress. We can't come together and say, okay, let's have a conversation about gun control, because immediately the polarization will start, and one side will say, you want to abolish the Second Amendment. And it's like, no, nobody said that. But that's exactly what they say first, and then the whole conversation shuts down. It's like if we say, hey, let's take a look at healthcare. How can we make it better so people aren't so financially impacted all the time? They say, oh, it's socialization. You're going to turn this country into a socialized place or a socialist place, and then the debate stops. And so I think that's a big problem with guns, because if you want to come to the table and say, hey, to your point, how about some more robust background checks or something I feel very strongly with is, why can't, if you have to be 25 to rent a car, because 25 is kind of, I guess, what society says, okay, you finally have your act together and you can make some good decisions. You can rent a car. So why can't we just say, I would say you need to be 25 to buy an AR-15. If you don't agree with me, okay, how about 21? But right now, in many places, it's 18. And we know that a lot of our mass shooters not all of them, a lot of them are between the ages of 18 and 21. So just a small tweak right there. Let's make it so those individuals have to wait a little bit before they have access to a weapon that can kill massive amounts of people in a short amount of time. That right there might just help a little bit. Some of these young men, because that's what they are in general, might grow out of that a little bit. They might evolve, maybe not. But just my point is we can't even make a little tweak.
Nothing.
It just, there's no conversation, there's no debate, there's no progress. And so that's a big problem for us.
Drew, we cannot even talk about it. That's the thing that I've been trying to find, because I'm very passionate about it, for all the reasons I described before, how much I love this community and where I come from. I really wish I didn't live the things I lived in Venezuela. And here in the U.S., I want to talk. Yeah. I want to find somebody who agree or disagree or have an idea, but just let's talk, man. What is it? How can we hash things out and just come up to a place where we're like, okay, that kind of makes sense. Or let me think about it. But when you look at the media, the polarization of political ideologies, how things get more and more radical, it just compels you to even self-censor. It's like, I don't even want to talk about it. It's just going to be so tricky. Yeah,
it's really sad. And our kids deserve better. And to bring it back to education, you know, I wonder, are we doing our job as educators to set kids up to have complex conversations, to listen to things that that they might not agree with without shutting down or getting upset, and have an exchange of ideas? Again, I think some of the things that we were able to do in this country up until a couple of decades ago, and now we seem to have lost it. And what's our role as schools setting up future generations to engage in those things, to have empathy and understanding for other people, even if you don't agree with them. And then ultimately, again, to compromise, to reach some sort of compromise to move forward. When you think about Congress in this country, I mean, I can't think of very much that they've done to come together and write policy and decide on something and move forward recently. It's just, you know, everyone takes their sides and tries to score points for their side. And meanwhile, no problems get solved and nothing gets done. So what are we doing to tee future generations up to show up differently? It's concerning.
It is very concerning. And it's almost a deja vu for me, because I lived that in Venezuela.
Well, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that you have to go with, you know, through what you went through in a place where there's very different and very real challenges, and come here to the quote unquote, you know, land of the free, and we can't even get our shit together to solve problems. You know, it's embarrassing.
It is paradoxical, because I can buy myself 25 pairs of shoes and the car I want, and get myself a loan and get me a watch, and like I have that freedom. But when it comes to talking about other things, and I find myself in those waters when I express my opinion on one thing or the other, people are trying to see which side are you. I'm like, I didn't grow up here. I don't belong to any side.
Because they're trying to put you in a box. They're trying to make a mental note. Okay, here's his side, and make assumptions that they know about you and what you think. And it's a lot of it's laziness.
Yeah, and I always tell my American friends and my immigrant friends to think critically beyond any box. Just think beyond that. Especially, well, I feel that way because I owe it to the kiddos. Like, I want these kiddos to be better than me in whatever definition I have of what it is like to be better as a human being, intellectually, culturally, more diverse, more open to the world, you know, more sensitive, I guess, of their environment. But also, you know, I want you to have the opportunity to think for yourself.
Absolutely.
I don't want you to, you know, when I express my ideas, I don't want to be put in one or the other box, because I have been in the U.S. for 15 years only, and I really don't have that baggage, and that kind of gives me a little bit of freedom.
Yeah, well, in perspective. But again, how are we supporting our kids in in showing up like that and understanding that. To connect it back to schools, one of the things I remember looking at the questions prior, and one of them was, what would I change about the educational system? I would put a much stronger emphasis on science and social studies. It troubles me sometimes that all of our high stakes testing and so much of our efforts are around math and literacy. And of course, I recognize math and literacy are important. Don't think I'm not saying that.
Of course.
But when you think about the things that we're talking about, being an informed citizen, thinking critically, having scientific literacy so you can be part of moving this planet forward and solving very real problems such as climate change that right now aren't being adequately addressed, understanding how to shift the political system in this country to a place of again, compromise, progress, understanding how our government works. Those are things that kids are going to learn in science and social studies. And one of my biggest fears, and I've seen this as a leader, is how often science and social studies will get put on the side because we've got to make sure that we're finishing our literacy lesson or finishing our math lesson, because guess what? CMAS is coming up. And so I've often thought, and I'm not saying, I don't know if this is a good idea, but what would it be like if the SPF was heavily weighted in science and social studies, CMAS, and we put this massive focus on those things? What would the societal implications be? How would we show up as educators to put an emphasis on some of those things that you and I are talking about to better support our kids moving forward? Sometimes I worry that while we might be supporting our kids to, with strong literacy skills, and again, that's important because you have to be a critical consumer of information, and our literacy standards speak to that. And I know that, of course, math helps you think logically. And I'm not saying that we should not focus on those things, but to the expense of science and social studies, it troubles me sometimes. Are our kids going to be able to read and write well and compute well, but then be impacted with their degree of understanding on the scientific method and scientific literacy and how to show up as an informed citizen and do your job in our society, which is to be involved, be an informed voter, make educated decisions on who you're voting for, and then follow up with your elected representatives to hold them accountable for showing up and doing their job, which is solving our problems. And so it's interesting to think about the role that schools play in that. Amen.
What do you think classroom instruction is going to look like 30 years from now?
Oh, man. That's very interesting to think about because I'll maybe take it on a tangent that some of your different guests haven't gone, but I've been reading a lot lately about chat GTP, and if I'm saying that right, and AI, and I don't know, I admittedly don't understand it that well, but from what I do know, it could have impacts on how information is relayed to students, and then also how they kick back and engage. And so I'm wondering, what are the implications for students if we want them to continue to do the things that we value today, to be those critical thinkers, to produce the work, if technology gets to the point where it can do a lot of things for them? Is that, and I don't know, I don't understand it enough to necessarily put a value judgment on it. Is that a bad thing? Does that mean that that it will be another thing that we don't ask our kids to do instead of that's not refining them and making them stronger and making them better? Or will it free them up to engage in different ways and maybe have more of the dialogue that you and I are talking about and be those critical thinkers? I don't know. It's just, I've been reading about it a lot and wondering what the implications are for education. Thank you for listening to that little tangent. That aside, I'll connect to my last answer. I hope that 30 years from now, we are infusing more of the things that I just spoke to around supporting students and understanding. Again, scientific literacy is a big one for me. I think that our planet is at a crossroads, and if we especially in this society, if we don't double down on our belief that science leads to progress, I think we could be going to some scary places. And then again, that active and engaged and informed citizen piece. So I would hope that you would see more of an allowance in classrooms for time spent working on those skills. And then also the social emotional piece, to connect back to what we talked about, an increased infusion of the skills that our kids need to take care of themselves, but take care of each other. I mean, because it goes back to what you and I were talking about. If we don't do something about that, we're going to continue to have, not all, but some kids grow up living in these isolated spaces and feeling disconnected and not feeling empathy and not feeling commonality, and that worries me. I hope this isn't the most depressing podcast you've had yet, because we're talking about some heavy stuff here.
I really appreciate everything you're saying, and I am fearful of being repetitive with my response to you, because at least in the last 15 episodes I've recorded, we always go back to the idea of ChatGPT, and you just brought it up by yourself.
Oh, really?
It is happening.
Oh, wow.
It is.
Okay.
There is no way back to it. There is no way back to it. It's just it's a algorithm. It's artificial intelligence model that is being trained to read algorithms based on language.
Yeah.
And it's all the language that is being put on the internet, as you already know.
Sure.
And the internet has everything. Yeah. It has Shakespeare. It has Albert Einstein. It has Newton. It has everything that the human race has ever created is uploaded into the internet. And this algorithm has been trained to develop a model based on everything that the human species has ever created. And we're creating this box that is pulling from the wisdom that we have developed for thousands of years.
And in some ways, that's not a bad thing. We can't outsource our thinking to that box. We can't. I think there are times in this society where, and if we're the most free society, and in some ways we are, we've taken that freedom and chosen to become kind of lazy sometimes. And I'm not talking about our kids. I'm talking about in general. We're not pushing ourselves to be as educated and as critical as we should be. And so my fear would be that this allows us to do that even more.
Yes.
I'm scared about that. It worries me that that people can name more Real Housewives of wherever than they can scientists who have contributed to to some of the major breakthroughs in our country.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I do agree with that. I don't think it's depressing. I do think it's realistic, especially as we're getting close. Yeah. So with the artificial intelligence model, with ChatGPT and all those patterns, what is very likely going to happen is that the algorithms and the development of neuroscience is going to find other ways for kids to learn that will not necessarily relate on a teacher. There will be more like virtual reality goggles or those kind of VR worlds in which kids can associate colors with shapes and sounds. And the artificial intelligence algorithm can teach a kid how to read and recognize patterns and do math faster than a teacher would. Yeah, precisely because an artificial intelligence doesn't have to take 45 minutes to plan and 8 hours to sleep and to be a parent. It can give itself feedback in the moment.
And I think that points to, we start off talking about the complexity of what we ask teachers to do. If there are some benefits to take some of that load off of teachers in ways that aren't going to be harmful to kids, then great. But then as educators, then we need to make sure that we're pushing ourselves to fill in those spaces around, the social emotional and the interconnectedness and in the human elements. To make sure we're not going down the road where our kids are just plugged in all day, learning to read, write, et cetera, from AI. Obviously that sounds a little bit scary for particular reasons too. Going back to what you and I were talking about previously, which is just that isolation. So what's the sweet spot there? What's the sweet spot between taking advantage of the new technology and the efficiency and we ask teachers to make those in the moment instructional decisions and differentiation and all that. So there's some exciting thoughts about, could AI do that at a very highly effective level? That's incredible. But the truth always lies somewhere in the middle, and there's you don't want the pendulum to swing too far one 100%. Direction.
Yeah, man, it has been a pleasure.
Agreed.
It has been a pleasure. I feel very lucky to have spent this time with you for all the wisdom you've shared and all the things that we've been able to discuss.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I would have been excited to continue to talk education, but it's been really interesting and really fun to kind of touch on some of these things.
Yeah, I really hope we can continue to have these opportunities, maybe have you back in the future and explore some of these ideas. I think all the leaders and educators that have been watching this episode will find something really, really of substance to learn from. So very grateful for you, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.